The scar that ran from Faith Lawson's temple to her jaw had been a gift from a spooked horse when she was 16. And in the 8 years since, she had learned to live with the stares, the whispers, and the way men's eyes slid past her as if she were invisible. She stood at the edge of the dusty street in Enid, Oklahoma Territory, watching the late afternoon sun paint the wooden storefronts gold, her hand unconsciously rising to touch the raised flesh that marked her face before she forced it back down to her side. It was September of 1897, and Faith had traveled 300 miles from her family's failing farm in eastern Kansas to answer an advertisement for a cook and housekeeper at a cattle ranch. The letter of acceptance had been terse, but not unkind, signed by someone named Zachary Jennings, and it had represented the only opportunity she had received after sending out a dozen inquiries. Her father had died the previous winter, her mother 2 years before that, and her younger brothers had already scattered to find work in the cities. The farm had been sold to pay debts, leaving Faith with a worn carpetbag, $40, and the certain knowledge that no man would ever want to marry a woman who looked like her. The directions to the Jennings ranch had been specific, and she found the livery stable without difficulty. A grizzled man with tobacco-stained teeth quoted her $2 for a wagon ride out to the property, which lay some 12 miles northwest of town. She counted out the coins carefully, aware of how quickly her small reserve was dwindling, and climbed onto the hard wooden seat beside him. The driver proved to be taciturn, offering only grunts in response to her attempts at conversation, which suited Faith well enough. She studied the landscape as they rolled along the rutted road, taking in the vast expanse of prairie grass that rippled like water in the wind, the occasional stand of cottonwood trees marking where water ran, and the huge sky that seemed to swallow everything beneath it. Kansas had been flat, but this was different, more open somehow, as if the land itself was holding its breath. The Jennings ranch appeared gradually, first as a smudge on the horizon, then as distinct buildings that grew larger as they approached. A 2-story house painted white stood at the center, weathered but well-maintained, with a wide porch wrapping around 3 sides. To the left sprawled a large barn, several corrals and various outbuildings. Cattle dotted the fields in the distance, and Faith could see at least 3 men on horseback working among them. The wagon pulled up in front of the house, and before Faith could gather her belongings, the front door opened and a man stepped out onto the porch. He was tall and lean, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and sun-bronzed skin that spoke of years working outdoors. He wore simple work clothes, canvas pants and a chambray shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and when he descended the steps to greet her, she noticed he moved with an easy grace that suggested strength held in reserve. "Miss Lawson." His voice was deep and warm, with a hint of something that might have been Texas in the vowels. "Yes." Faith climbed down from the wagon without assistance, not wanting to impose, and retrieved her bag before the driver could toss it into the dirt. "Mr. Jennings." "Zachary Jennings, yes, madam." He had blue eyes, she noticed, the color of the sky just before full dark, and they met hers directly without the flinch or slide she had come to expect. "Welcome to the Double J. I hope your journey was not too difficult." "It was fine, thank you." She paid the driver and stood uncertainly as the wagon rattled away, leaving her alone with this stranger who was now her employer. The wind tugged at her bonnet, and she resisted the urge to adjust it, to make sure it covered as much of her face as possible. Zachary picked up her carpetbag before she could protest. "You must be tired and hungry. Let me show you the house, and then I will have someone bring your things to your room." "This is all I have," Faith said, gesturing to the single bag. Something flickered in his expression, too quick to interpret, but his tone remained pleasant. "Then that will make settling in all the easier. Come on up." The house was larger inside than it had appeared from outside, with a spacious front room furnished with solid, comfortable pieces that had clearly been chosen for utility rather than fashion. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, and the wooden floors were clean if slightly scuffed. Zachary led her through a dining room with a table that could seat 10, and finally into a kitchen that made Faith's breath catch. It was enormous, with a cast-iron cookstove that must have cost a fortune to transport out here, slate counters, a hand pump over a deep sink, and more pots, pans, and implements hanging from hooks than she had seen outside of a hotel. Windows on 2 walls let in abundant light, and a door at the back opened onto what looked like a vegetable garden. "My mother designed this kitchen," Zachary said, watching her reaction. "She was particular about having good equipment for cooking. She passed away 5 years ago, and we have not had much luck keeping a cook since. The last woman left 3 months ago to get married, and my hands and I have been making do with our own poor attempts ever since. How many men are we feeding?" Faith set down her bag and moved to the stove, running her hand along the smooth iron surface. "5 ranch hands myself, and we usually have a few extras at mealtimes, cowboys passing through or neighbors stopping by. Figure anywhere from 8 to 12 for dinner most nights, fewer for breakfast." He leaned against the door frame, arms crossed loosely. "I know that is a lot of work. The advertisement mentioned the wages. $30 a month plus room and board." It was generous, more than she had hoped for, which had made her suspicious when she first received the letter. "And Sundays off after breakfast is cleaned up." "That's right. Your room is upstairs, second door on the left. It has a good window and a lock on the door if that eases your mind any. The hands sleep in the bunkhouse, and they know to conduct themselves respectfully, or they will find employment elsewhere." His expression had gone serious. "I run a decent operation here, Miss Lawson. You will not be bothered or made uncomfortable. You have my word on that." Faith met his eyes again, searching for the lie, the catch, the thing that would reveal why a successful rancher could not keep a cook. But she saw only earnestness and a kind of quiet integrity that she wanted to believe in. "Thank you, Mr. Jennings. I appreciate your directness." "Just Zachary, please, or Zach if you prefer. We are not formal people out here." He pushed off from the door frame. "Would you like to rest, or would you rather get oriented today and start fresh tomorrow? I would prefer to start preparing supper if that is acceptable." Faith removed her bonnet and hung it on a peg by the door, then rolled up her sleeves. "I work better when I know what I am dealing with, and I imagine your men are ready for a decent meal. I will not argue with that." Zachary moved to the pantry and opened the door, revealing shelves stocked with flour, sugar, cornmeal, dried beans, and various canned goods. "We get supplies from town once a month, more often if needed. There is a smokehouse out back with ham and bacon, chickens for eggs, and a milk cow. The garden still has some late vegetables, and we usually have fresh beef since we cull from the herd regularly." Faith began pulling out ingredients, her mind already planning a menu. "How does roasted chicken with gravy, mashed potatoes, green beans, and biscuits sound for tonight? Like heaven." The relief in his voice was genuine. "What can I do to help?" She turned to him in surprise. "Help? You do not need to." "I know I do not need to, but it will go faster with 2, and I can show you where everything is at the same time." He was already moving to the sink, pumping water into a basin. "Besides, I have been doing my own cooking lately. I am not completely useless in a kitchen." There was something disarming about this tall rancher with his work-roughened hands preparing to help with domestic tasks. Faith found herself relaxing slightly, as they fell into an easy rhythm, Zachary following her directions to peel potatoes while she dressed the chickens. He asked questions about her preferences for organizing the kitchen, listened to her answers, and offered information about the household routine without any of the condescension she had sometimes encountered from men who thought women's work beneath their notice. "You said your mother designed this kitchen," Faith said as she seasoned the chickens and placed them in the oven. "Was she from around here? Texas originally. She met my father when he was driving cattle up from San Antonio. She was the daughter of a rancher there, knew the business inside and out, and was not afraid of hard work or hard country." Zachary's expression softened with memory as he worked. "My father always said she was the toughest person he ever met, and the kindest. She taught me that there is no shame in any honest work, whether it is branding cattle or baking bread. A person's value is not in what they do, but in how they do it. She sounds like a remarkable woman." She was. He dumped the peeled potatoes into a pot of water and set it on the stove. "She would have liked you, I think. You have that same quality of just getting on with what needs doing without fuss or complaint." Faith felt heat rise in her cheeks and turned away to focus on mixing the biscuit dough. She was not accustomed to compliments, and she did not quite know what to do with one now. "You have only known me an hour, Mr. Jennings. You cannot possibly know what qualities I have." "Zachary," he corrected gently. "And I know you traveled 300 miles alone to take a position with strangers. I know you have strong, capable hands, and that you did not hesitate to get to work, even though you must be exhausted. I know you look a person in the eye when you speak to them, which suggests honesty and courage both. That is more than enough to form a favorable impression." She glanced at him sidelong, suspicious of mockery, but his expression was entirely serious. "Most people do not look at me long enough to form any impression at all." The words slipped out before she could stop them, revealing more vulnerability than she had intended. She busied herself cutting the biscuits and arranging them on a pan, feeling his gaze on her scarred cheek like a physical touch. "Then most people are fools," Zachary said quietly. "Beauty is not a single thing, Miss Lawson. It is in the way a person moves through the world, in the work of their hands, in the steadiness of their spirit. A face is just a face. It is not the measure of anything important." Faith blinked rapidly against the sudden sting of tears. In 8 years, no one had ever said anything remotely like that to her. Her own brothers had offered awkward sympathy. Neighbors had clucked their tongues and called it a tragedy. One well-meaning woman had suggested she enter a convent since marriage was no longer a possibility. But no one had ever suggested that the scar did not diminish her value as a person. "That is kind of you to say," she managed, her voice only slightly unsteady. "It is not kindness. It is simple observation." Zachary moved to the door. "I should go let the men know to wash up for supper. They will be eager to meet you, though I should warn you that some of them have the manners of the cattle they herd. Do not let them trouble you. They are good men underneath the rough edges." After he left, Faith stood in the kitchen alone, her hands resting on the floury work surface, and tried to calm the strange tumult of feelings in her chest. She had come here expecting nothing more than a job, a place to sleep, and the dignity of earning her own way. She had not expected kindness from her employer, and she certainly had not expected to feel seen in a way she had not felt since before the accident. It was dangerous, she told herself sternly as she slid the biscuits into the oven. She could not afford to let her guard down, or to believe that anyone truly saw past the scar to the woman beneath. Experience had taught her that even the kindest people eventually flinched away, that pity was the best she could hope for, and that romantic love was a dream for other women. Women with smooth cheeks and pleasant faces that did not make children stare and grown men uncomfortable. The chickens roasted, filling the kitchen with savory smells. Faith drained and mashed the potatoes, adding butter and cream until they were fluffy, then prepared the green beans with bacon and onion. She made gravy from the pan drippings, rich and brown, and arranged everything in the serving dishes she found in the sideboard. By the time she heard the sound of boots on the porch, the table was set and the food was ready. 5 ranch hands filed in behind Zachary, removing their hats and looking at Faith with varying degrees of curiosity and hunger. They ranged in age from a boy who could not have been more than 19 to a weathered man with a gray mustache who looked to be past 60. Zachary performed introductions. Young Tommy Brennan, the brothers Frank and George Carson, a quiet man named Daniel Wade, and the older man, Pete Sullivan, who had worked for Zachary's father. "Welcome to the Double J, Miss Lawson," Pete said, his voice gravelly with age and tobacco. "We are mighty glad to have you. No offense to the boss, but his cooking could make a strong man weep." "Now, Pete," Zachary said mildly, taking his seat at the head of the table, "my cooking is not that bad." "Boss, I have eaten boot leather that was more tender than your steaks," George Carson said, grinning. "And remember that stew you made that was mostly burnt beans and wishful thinking?" The men laughed, and Faith found herself smiling as she brought the serving dishes to the table. The easy camaraderie among them was evident, and she felt some of her nervousness ease. These were working men, their hands scarred from rope and leather, their faces weathered from sun and wind, but there was nothing threatening in their manner. When she finally sat down at the foot of the table, the place Zachary indicated was hers, and the men began passing the food. She watched their reactions. Tommy loaded his plate with the enthusiasm of youth, while Pete took smaller portions but savored each bite with the appreciation of someone who had eaten too many bad meals. The table fell relatively quiet as they ate, which Faith took as a good sign. "Miss Lawson, this is the finest chicken I have had in a year," Frank Carson said after demolishing half his plate. "If you cook like this regular, you may have to beat us off with a stick. I am pleased it meets with approval." Faith took a small serving for herself, suddenly aware that she had not eaten since breakfast. The food was good, she could admit that without vanity, and she felt the satisfaction that always came from a meal well prepared. "Better than meets with approval," Zachary said. "This is excellent, truly. Thank you for getting right to work after such a long journey. It is what I am here for." Faith reached for her water glass and found Zachary's eyes on her again, that steady regard that seemed to see more than she wanted to reveal. She looked away quickly, focusing on her plate. The conversation flowed around her, the men discussing the day's work, plans for the coming week, and the price of cattle at the Kansas City stockyards. Faith listened more than she spoke, learning the rhythms of the household, the personalities of the men she would be cooking for. Tommy was good-natured and eager to please. The Carson brothers were jokers who nevertheless worked hard. Daniel Wade was quieter, speaking only when he had something worthwhile to say. Pete was clearly the veteran, his opinions respected, his experience valued. And Zachary presided over it all with a calm authority that never tipped into arrogance. He listened when his men spoke, considered their input, and made decisions with a confidence that suggested he knew exactly what he was doing. It was clear they respected him, not just as their employer but as a man. After supper, the hands returned to the bunkhouse, Pete stopping to thank Faith again for the meal with a courtly bow that made her smile. Zachary helped clear the table without being asked, carrying dishes to the kitchen while Faith pumped water into the sink. "You do not need to help with this," she protested, but he waved her off. Two of us will finish twice as fast, and you have already done more than your fair share today." He picked up a dish towel. "I will dry." They worked in companionable silence, the kitchen warm from the stove, the light outside fading to purple twilight. Faith found herself acutely aware of his presence beside her. The way his shoulder occasionally brushed hers when they moved in the small space, the competent way his hands handled the dishes. She had never worked so closely with a man before, and certainly not one who seemed so completely at ease with the domestic sphere. "May I ask you something?" Zachary said as they were finishing. Faith tensed. Here it would come, the question about her scar, the curiosity she had learned to expect. "Of course. Why did you leave Kansas?" The advertisement did not require someone to come from so far away. There must have been opportunities closer to home. It was not the question she had expected, and she relaxed slightly. "My parents are both dead, and the farm was sold. My brothers have gone to work in factories in Chicago and St. Louis. There was nothing left for me there, and I thought a fresh start somewhere new might be welcome. That took courage, or desperation." Faith dried her hands and hung the towel to dry. "I am not brave, Mr. Jennings. I am simply a woman alone in the world trying to make her way as best she can." "Zachary," he reminded her again, "and I disagree. There are many kinds of courage. The kind that faces down what must be faced is no less real for being quiet." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I hope you will find this a good place, Miss Lawson. The work is hard, but you will be treated fairly and with respect. And should you ever need anything, anything at all, you need only ask." "That is generous." Faith looked up at him, this man who had been nothing but kind since the moment she arrived, and felt something shift in her chest, a small crack in the armor she had built around her heart. "Thank you. No thanks are necessary." Zachary smiled, and it transformed his face, bringing warmth to his eyes and softening the hard lines that came from years of outdoor work. "Get some rest. Tomorrow will come early." Faith climbed the stairs to her room, a neat space with an iron bedstead covered in a colorful quilt, a chest of drawers, a washstand, and a rocking chair by the window. It was simple but clean, and infinitely better than what she had expected. She unpacked her few belongings, changed into her nightgown, and sat in the rocking chair to brush out her hair while looking out at the darkening prairie. She could see lights in the bunkhouse, and the dark shapes of the outbuildings against the star-filled sky. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, the sound lonely and wild. Faith touched her scar, tracing the familiar path of damaged skin, and thought about Zachary's words. "Beauty is not a single thing. It is in the way a person moves through the world, in the work of their hands, in the steadiness of their spirit." Could that possibly be true? Or was he simply being kind to his new employee, smoothing her entry into the household with pretty words that meant nothing? Faith did not know, but as she climbed into bed and pulled the quilt up to her chin, she felt something she had not felt in a very long time, a small, fragile seed of hope. The days that followed fell into a pattern that was both demanding and satisfying. Faith woke before dawn to start breakfast, feeding the cook stove and setting coffee to boil while the world outside was still dark. By the time the men came in from their morning chores, she had bacon, eggs, hot cakes or biscuits, and often fried potatoes ready and waiting. They ate quickly and with appreciation, then headed out to begin their workday while Faith cleaned up and started preparations for the midday meal. Dinner was the largest meal, served when the men came in from the range, and Faith quickly learned to prepare food that could be kept warm without suffering if they were delayed. Roasts, stews, pot roasts, chicken and dumplings, all served with bread and vegetables and dessert. She raided the pantry and the garden ruthlessly. using her mother's recipes and some she made up herself, determined to provide variety and quality. Supper was lighter, often leftovers from dinner with fresh bread or cornbread, and perhaps a pie if she had time. After cleanup, Faith had a few hours to herself before bed, time she spent mending, reading the books she found in the parlor, or sitting on the porch watching the sunset paint the prairie in shades of gold and crimson. Zachary was a constant presence, though rarely intrusive. He ate breakfast with the hands but often came back to the house during the day to check on things, and Faith grew accustomed to finding him in the kitchen, usually offering to help with some task or another. He carried water, chopped vegetables, turned meat on the spit, and did dishes with a willingness that surprised her every time. "You not have a ranch to run?" she asked one afternoon when he appeared to help her snap beans for canning. "I do, but my foreman is capable and the work gets done whether I hover or not." He settled into the chair across from her, his long fingers nimble with the beans. "Besides, I like being useful. Too much time in the saddle makes my back ache." Faith doubted that was the real reason, but she did not press. The truth was she enjoyed his company more than she wanted to admit. He talked to her about the ranch, about his plans to expand the herd, about the challenges of the cattle business. He asked her opinion on things, treated her thoughts as if they mattered, and listened when she spoke. It was intoxicating, being listened to, being treated as if her mind was as valuable as her cooking skills. Faith found herself looking forward to these interludes, to the sound of his boots on the porch that signaled his arrival, to the easy conversation that flowed between them. She tried to maintain her guard, to remember that this was her employer and nothing more, but it became increasingly difficult as the weeks passed. And Zachary continued to be unfailingly kind, unfailingly respectful, and unfailingly present in a way that made her feel less alone than she had in years. One Saturday in early October, Zachary announced at breakfast that he would be taking a wagon into Enid for supplies, and asked if Faith would like to accompany him to select some items for the kitchen. The thought of going into town filled her with familiar dread, the certainty that people would stare, that she would see pity or revulsion in their eyes. But the kitchen did need things, and it would be easier to choose them herself. "I would appreciate that, thank you," she said, keeping her voice steady. They set out mid-morning, the wagon rattling along the road under a sky of brilliant blue. October in Oklahoma Territory was cooler than September had been, the air crisp and clean, the prairie grass turning gold. Zachary handled the horses with easy competence, and Faith sat beside him, her hands folded in her lap, trying to prepare herself for the ordeal of being seen in public. "You are nervous," Zachary observed after they had traveled a few miles. There was no point in denying it. "Towns are difficult for me. People stare. Then they are rude and poorly raised." His voice was matter of fact. "You have nothing to be ashamed of, Faith." It was the first time he had used her given name, and the sound of it in his low voice sent a small shiver through her. "I am not ashamed. I am simply realistic about people's reactions. Would it help if I stayed with you? I need to visit the feed store and the bank, but I can arrange to meet you between errands so you are not alone." The offer was kind, and Faith found herself accepting even though she should have refused, should have insisted she was perfectly capable of managing on her own. But the truth was she did not want to be alone, and having Zachary nearby would make the experience easier to bear. Enid was bustling with Saturday activity when they arrived, the streets crowded with wagons and horses, the boardwalks full of people doing their weekly shopping. Zachary parked in front of the general store and helped Faith down, his hand warm and strong on hers. She felt eyes turn toward them, saw the flicker of curiosity and the inevitable moment when people noticed her scar and looked away. Zachary must have seen it too, because his jaw tightened and he offered her his arm with deliberate courtesy. "Shall we?" Faith hesitated, then placed her hand in the crook of his elbow, feeling the solid muscle beneath the fabric of his coat. It was a statement, walking into the store this way, and she knew it. People would assume they were together, courting perhaps, and the thought made her heart race even as she knew it was ridiculous. The general store was large and well-stocked, with everything from dry goods to hardware to ready-made clothing. The proprietor, a balding man with spectacles, greeted Zachary by name and gave Faith a brief, assessing look before turning his attention to business. Zachary explained that Miss Lawson was his new cook and needed to select supplies, and asked that everything be charged to his account. "Take your time," he told Faith. "Get whatever you need. I will be back in about an hour." Faith moved through the store methodically, selecting spices, baking powder, vanilla extract, dried fruit, and various other items she had been missing. The proprietor's wife, a pleasant woman named Martha, helped her find things and made conversation without once mentioning Faith's appearance. It was such a relief that Faith found herself relaxing slightly, even smiling at the woman's stories about her grandchildren. She was examining a bolt of calico fabric, thinking it would make a nice curtain for the kitchen window, when she heard raised voices near the front of the store. Turning, she saw a woman in an expensive dress and elaborate hat speaking to the proprietor in tones of clear displeasure. "I specifically ordered that shipment to arrive last week, Mr. Henderson. Do you know how inconvenient this is? I apologize, Mrs. Crawford, but the shipment was delayed in Kansas City. It should arrive next week without fail." "That is what you said last time." The woman's gaze swept the store and landed on Faith with the sharp assessment of someone used to cataloging and judging everyone she met. Her eyes widened slightly when she saw the scar, then narrowed. "Who is that?" "That is Miss Lawson, the new cook at the Double J," Martha Henderson said quickly, as if sensing trouble. "She just arrived a few weeks ago." "I see." Mrs. Crawford moved closer and Faith resisted the urge to step back. "Zachary Jennings hired you." "Yes, madam." Faith kept her voice polite but cool. "How interesting. I had heard he was looking for a cook. I suggested my niece for the position, but apparently he made other arrangements." The woman's tone suggested this was a personal slight. "Well, I suppose someone has to do the work." The dismissal was clear, and Faith felt the familiar burn of humiliation in her chest. Before she could formulate a response, the door opened and Zachary entered, his presence seeming to fill the space. His eyes found Faith immediately, then moved to Mrs. Crawford with an expression that was perfectly polite and utterly cold. "Mrs. Crawford, I trust you are well, Zachary." The woman's manner changed instantly, becoming almost coy. "I was just meeting your new cook. Such an unusual choice." "Miss Lawson is an excellent cook and a valued member of my household." Zachary moved to stand beside Faith, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. "I consider myself fortunate to have found someone of her caliber." "Yes, well, as I mentioned, my niece is quite skilled in domestic arts." "If this arrangement does not work out, you should let me know." "That will not be necessary, but thank you for your concern." Zachary's tone made it clear the conversation was over. He turned to Faith. "Are you ready? I have the wagon loaded." Faith nodded, grateful for the rescue even as part of her bristled at needing to be rescued at all. Zachary settled the account with Mr. Henderson, refused Mrs. Crawford's invitation to dinner the following Sunday with smooth courtesy, and escorted Faith out of the store with his hand light on her lower back. "That woman is a menace," he muttered once they were outside. "I apologize if she was unpleasant to you." She was nothing I have not encountered before. Faith climbed into the wagon, arranging her skirts with hands that were not quite steady. Though I appreciate your intervention, Eloise Crawford has been trying to marry me off to her niece for the past 3 years. Zachary took up the reins and guided the horses into the flow of traffic. She seems to believe that persistence will eventually wear me down, but she is mistaken. I will marry when and whom I choose, and it will not be because some busybody decided to play matchmaker. Faith was silent, digesting this information. It had not occurred to her that Zachary might be under pressure to marry, though she supposed it made sense. He was a successful rancher, still young, and certainly not unpleasant to look at. Women would naturally be interested, and their mothers even more so. "Why have you not married?" The question escaped before she could think better of it, and she immediately flushed. "Forgive me, that was impertinent." "Not at all. It is a fair question." Zachary considered for a moment. "I suppose I have not found anyone I wanted to spend the rest of my life with. My parents had a true partnership, real love and respect and friendship all tangled together. They made each other better, stronger, happier. I will not settle for less than that, no matter how much people like Eloise Crawford think I should." "That is admirable." Faith looked down at her hands. "Most people marry for more practical reasons. Most people accept less than they deserve." He glanced at her, his expression serious. "What about you, Faith? Did you never want to marry?" The question pierced something in her chest, and she had to swallow against the sudden tightness in her throat. "That was never an option for me, not after the accident." "Why not?" "Because no man wants a wife who is scarred and ugly." The words came out harder than she intended. "I learned that quickly enough. The boy who had been courting me could barely look at me afterward. My friends stopped including me in social events because I made people uncomfortable. I accepted the reality of my situation." Zachary was quiet for a long moment, the only sound the creak of the wagon and the clip-clop of the horses' hooves. When he spoke, his voice was low and intense. "Then every single one of those people was a fool, and you deserve better than to believe their blindness reflects your worth." Faith turned to stare at him. "You speak as if the scar does not exist." "I speak as if it does not matter." He met her eyes, and the sincerity in his gaze made her breath catch. "Faith, I have seen you work from dawn until late in the evening without complaint. I have watched you treat my men with kindness and respect. I have tasted the care you put into every meal, seen the way you keep my mother's kitchen with pride and skill. I have talked with you about everything from literature to politics, and found you to be intelligent, thoughtful, and interesting. Why would any of that be less important than a mark on your skin? Because people care about appearances." Her voice was barely a whisper. "Some people do, I do not." He turned his attention back to the road, but his jaw was tight. "I see you, Faith Lawson, not your scar. You. And what I see is a woman of courage, competence, and quiet grace. That is beautiful to me in ways that matter." Faith could not speak, could not breathe around the emotion swelling in her chest. No one had ever said such things to her, and she did not know how to process the flood of feelings his words evoked. Part of her wanted to believe him desperately. Another part, the part that had been hurt and rejected, insisted this was pity or kindness, nothing more. They rode the rest of the way back to the ranch in silence, but it was not uncomfortable. Faith stole glances at Zachary's profile when she thought he was not looking, seeing the strength in the lines of his face, the capable hands managing the reins, the breadth of his shoulders beneath his coat. He was a handsome man, though she doubted he gave it much thought. More than that, he was good, genuinely good in a way that had nothing to do with appearances and everything to do with character. When they arrived back at the ranch, Zachary insisted on carrying all the supplies into the kitchen while Faith directed where things should go. The hands were out working, and the house was quiet around them. As Zachary set down the last bag, his hand brushed Faith's, and the contact sent a jolt of awareness through her that she could not ignore. "Thank you for today," she said, stepping back quickly. "For the supplies and for what you said. I only spoke the truth." Zachary remained where he was, his eyes searching her face. "Faith, I hope you know that you are welcome here, not just as my cook but as part of this place. You belong here if you want to stay." The intensity of his gaze, the weight of his words, was too much. Faith turned away, busying herself with putting away the supplies. "I should start on dinner preparations. The men will be hungry." If Zachary was disappointed by her retreat, he did not show it. "Of course, I will let you work." After he left, Faith stood in the middle of the kitchen, her heart pounding, her hands trembling slightly. She pressed her palms flat against the counter and tried to calm the wild hope that was rising in her chest like floodwater. It was dangerous, this feeling. She had sworn after the accident that she would never let herself be vulnerable again, would never give anyone the power to hurt her the way she had been hurt before. But Zachary Jennings was making it very difficult to keep that promise. The weeks that followed were a kind of sweet torture. Zachary continued to seek out Faith's company, appearing in the kitchen to help with chores, sitting with her on the porch in the evenings, riding beside the wagon when she went to gather wild plums for jam. He never pushed, never made demands, but his presence was constant and increasingly necessary to her happiness. Faith tried to maintain her distance, to remember that this was her employer and that she had no right to the feelings that were growing in her heart. But it was like trying to hold back the tide. Every kindness, every smile, every moment of easy companionship wore away at her defenses until she was forced to admit, at least to herself, that she was falling in love with Zachary Jennings. It was both wonderful and terrifying. October gave way to November, the weather turning colder, the prairie grass brown and sere. Faith preserved vegetables and fruits, stocked the root cellar, and helped slaughter hogs for winter meat. She made mincemeat and sausage, rendered lard, and packed crocks of salt pork. The work was hard but satisfying, and she took pride in preparing the household for the coming winter. Thanksgiving came, and Zachary invited several neighboring families to the ranch for dinner. Faith cooked for 2 days, preparing turkeys, ham, cornbread dressing, sweet potatoes, mashed potatoes, green beans, cranberry sauce, rolls, and 5 different pies. She was exhausted by the time the guests arrived, but the praise for the meal was effusive, and she felt a glow of accomplishment. Zachary insisted she join them at the table rather than serving, seating her beside him and including her in all the conversations. Faith was acutely aware of the curious looks from the guests, the speculation in some eyes, but Zachary's easy manner beside her provided a buffer against discomfort. He spoke of her contributions to the ranch with genuine appreciation, treated her as an equal, and if the guests found this unusual, they were too polite to say so. After everyone left and the kitchen was finally clean, Faith sat in the parlor with a cup of tea, too tired to climb the stairs just yet. Zachary appeared in the doorway, his coat already removed, his hair slightly disheveled. "You should be asleep on your feet," he said, moving to sit in the chair across from her. "That was an amazing meal, Faith. You outdid yourself. It went well, I think." She sipped her tea, savoring the warmth. "Your neighbors seem like good people." "They are. I have known most of them for years." He leaned back, stretching his long legs toward the fire. "Did you enjoy yourself?" "I did, actually. It was nice to be part of a celebration." Faith set down her cup and met his eyes. "Thank you for including me. You did not have to do that." "Of course I did. You are part of this household, and I wanted you there." He was quiet for a moment, his gaze steady on her face. "Faith, can I ask you something?" Her heart began to beat faster. "Yes." "You ever think about the future, about what you want for yourself beyond cooking in someone else's kitchen?" The question caught her off guard. "I try not to think about it too much. I am grateful to have a position and a place to live. That is more than many women in my situation can claim." "But if you could have anything, what would you want?" Faith looked down at her hands, unsure how to answer. The truth was dangerous, but perhaps it was time to be brave. "I suppose I would want what most women want. A home of my own, someone to share my life with, children perhaps. The things I thought were lost to me after my accident. Why should they be lost?" Zachary leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "Faith, you are only 24 years old. You have your whole life ahead of you. You really believe you are not entitled to happiness just because of a scar?" "I believe I am realistic about my prospects." She forced herself to meet his eyes. "No man is going to want me, Zachary. I have made my peace with that. No man has been worthy of you." His voice was low and fierce. "But that does not mean one never will be." The air between them felt charged, crackling with tension and unspoken words. Faith's breath came shallow, her heart hammering against her ribs. She should look away, should retreat to the safety of her room, but she could not seem to move. "Faith." Zachary stood and crossed to where she sat, dropping to one knee so they were at eye level. "I need to tell you something, and I hope you will hear me out." She nodded, not trusting her voice. "These past few months have been the happiest of my life, not just because the food is better, though that certainly helps." His mouth quirked in a slight smile. "But because you are here. Because I get to talk to you every day, work beside you, learn who you are as a person. You are smart and funny and kind and strong. You face each day with a grace that humbles me. And I find myself thinking about you constantly, looking for excuses to be near you, counting the hours until I can see you again." Faith's eyes widened. "Zachary, let me finish, please." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand in both of his. "I am falling in love with you, Faith. I think I have been since the day you arrived and jumped right into cooking supper without a moment's hesitation. I love your competence and your courage. I love the way you treat my men with respect. I love watching you work, the way your hands move so surely, the little furrow you get between your eyes when you are concentrating. I love everything about you, and none of it has anything to do with your appearance." Tears were streaming down Faith's face now, hot and unchecked. "You cannot mean that. You are my employer and you are being kind, but I have never been more serious about anything in my life." He raised one hand to her face, his thumb gently catching a tear from the unmarked side. "I know there is an imbalance of power between us, and if this is unwelcome, if I am making you uncomfortable, you need only say so and we will never speak of it again. Your position here is secure regardless. But Faith, if there is any chance you might return my feelings, I am asking for the opportunity to court you properly, to see if what I believe is growing between us is real." Faith was shaking, her whole body trembling with emotion. Part of her insisted this could not be real, that she was misunderstanding, that he would eventually see her clearly and recoil. But the larger part, the part that had been slowly unfurling like a flower in his presence, wanted desperately to believe. "I am scared," she whispered. "I have been hurt before, Zachary. I do not know if I can bear it again. I know. And I will not make promises I cannot keep, but I can promise you this. I will never hurt you deliberately. I will never lie to you. And I will spend every day showing you that you are valued and cherished, not despite who you are, but because of it." His eyes searched hers. "Will you let me try?" Faith closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and made the most terrifying decision of her life. "Yes." The smile that spread across Zachary's face was like sunrise, bright and warm and full of promise. He stood, drawing her up with him, and for a long moment they simply stood there, hands clasped, looking at each other with new awareness. "May I kiss you?" he asked softly. Faith's breath caught. No one had ever asked to kiss her, not even before the accident. She nodded, not trusting her voice, and Zachary stepped closer. He moved slowly, giving her every opportunity to change her mind, but Faith did not want to. When his lips finally met hers, soft and gentle and full of restrained passion, she felt something inside her chest break open, releasing years of pain and loneliness and fear. The kiss was tender, almost reverent, and when it ended, Zachary rested his forehead against hers, his breath warm on her skin. "I have wanted to do that for weeks," he murmured. "I did not think anyone would ever want to kiss me again." Faith's voice was thick with tears. "I did not think anyone would ever see me the way you seem to. Then I will spend however long it takes convincing you that I do see you, and that what I see is extraordinary." He pressed another soft kiss to her forehead, then stepped back reluctantly. "You need rest, and so do I. But tomorrow, if you are willing, I would like to take you riding. I want to show you the ranch, all of it, the places that are special to me." "I would like that." They parted at the base of the stairs, Zachary's hand lingering in hers for a moment before he released it and headed to his own room. Faith climbed to her room in a daze, hardly able to process what had just happened. She changed into her nightgown mechanically, her fingers touching her lips where Zachary had kissed her, and sat in the rocking chair by the window. The prairie stretched out before her, silver in the moonlight, vast and beautiful and terrifying in its openness. She had come here expecting nothing, carrying the weight of her damaged face and damaged heart, certain that her life would be one of solitary service. Instead, she had found something she had never dared hope for, a man who truly saw her, who valued her for who she was rather than what she looked like. It was more than she had dreamed possible, and the joy of it was almost painful in its intensity. The next morning dawned clear and cold, with frost painting intricate patterns on the windows. Faith dressed carefully, choosing her sturdy split riding skirt and a warm jacket, then headed downstairs to start breakfast. She was whisking eggs when Zachary appeared in the kitchen doorway, and the smile he gave her made her heart flutter. "Good morning," he said, his voice warm. "Good morning." Faith felt heat rise in her cheeks and ducked her head, focusing on her work. "Breakfast will be ready soon." "Take your time. The men can wait a few extra minutes." Zachary moved into the room, and Faith felt him behind her, the warmth of his presence. "Faith!" She turned, and he was right there, close enough to touch. He reached out and tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek, the scarred side, and she had to fight the urge to pull away. "Still beautiful in the morning light," he said softly, then pressed a quick kiss to her forehead before moving to the coffee pot. "What can I do to help?" They worked together in easy harmony, and when the men came in for breakfast, Faith noticed Pete watching them with a knowing gleam in his eye. The old cowboy said nothing, but he winked at her when Zachary was not looking, and Faith had to suppress a smile. After breakfast and cleanup, Zachary had 2 horses saddled and waiting. Faith's mare was a gentle bay named Daisy, and Zachary rode a tall chestnut gelding called Copper. They set out across the prairie, riding side by side, the cold air bringing color to their cheeks and making the horses frisky. Zachary showed her the boundaries of his land, pointing out where his property adjoined his neighbor's, where the best grazing was, where water could be found. They stopped on a high rise that overlooked the entire ranch, the buildings small in the distance, cattle dotting the grassland like toys. "My father staked this claim in 1889, during the land run," Zachary said, his hands resting on his saddle horn. He and my mother literally raced to get here, fought off claim jumpers, and built everything from nothing. It nearly killed them both, but they did it. And then they spent the next 20 years making it into something more. They must have been remarkable people. They were, and stubborn as mules, both of them. He smiled at the memory. My father died 3 years ago, kicked by a horse. My mother was never the same after that. She just sort of faded away, like she did not want to be here without him. When she died, I thought about selling the ranch, going somewhere else, starting fresh. But this is their legacy, and I could not let it go. I am glad you did not. Faith looked out over the land, understanding why he loved it. It is beautiful here. It is. Harsh sometimes, especially in winter, but beautiful. He turned to her. Would you like to see my favorite place? They rode for another half-hour, following a creek lined with cottonwood trees, until they came to a spot where the water pooled into a small pond. Willows drooped over the edges, and even in late November, there was a sense of life here, of water and green things persisting despite the cold. I used to come here as a boy when I needed to think, Zachary said, dismounting and helping Faith down. It is peaceful, private. No one else ever comes this far out. They stood by the water's edge, close but not touching, and Faith felt the significance of him bringing her here, sharing this place that clearly meant something to him. Zachary, why me? The question burst out of her. You could have anyone. Someone pretty and accomplished, someone without complications. Why would you choose me? He turned to face her fully, his expression serious. Do you remember what you said when I asked what you would want for the future? You said a home, someone to share your life with, children. That is what I want too. But more than that, I want a partner, someone who understands hard work and sacrifice, someone with strength and resilience. I want someone I can talk to, someone who challenges me and makes me think. I want someone who will love this land and this life as much as I do. He reached out and took both her hands in his. I have met a lot of women, Faith. Beautiful women, accomplished women, women who could run a household with their eyes closed. But I have never met anyone who made me want to be a better man, who made me excited to wake up in the morning just because I would get to see her. That person is you. Not despite your scar, not in spite of it, but including it. Your scar is part of your story, part of who you are, and I would not change a single thing about you. Faith was crying again, helpless against the emotion his words evoked. I want to believe you. I am trying to believe you. Then let me prove it to you. He raised her hands to his lips and kissed them. Let me court you properly. Let me show you every day that I mean what I say. And when you are ready, if you are ever ready, I want to marry you. I want to make you my wife and spend the rest of my life making you happy. We barely know each other, Faith protested weakly. It has only been 3 months, I know. And I am willing to wait as long as you need. There is no rush, no pressure. I just want you to know my intentions are serious and honorable. He smiled. Besides, I think 3 months of seeing someone every day, working beside them, sharing meals and conversation, is worth more than 3 years of supervised parlor visits once a week. I know you, Faith. I know the things that matter. Faith looked up into his face, this good man who was offering her everything she had ever wanted and more. Fear still clawed at her, the old wounds refusing to fully heal. But underneath, it was a growing certainty that this was real, that Zachary Jennings truly saw her and loved what he saw. I care about you, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. More than I should, probably. I have been trying not to, trying to protect myself, but I cannot seem to help it. Then stop trying. Zachary pulled her closer, wrapping his arms around her. Let yourself feel what you feel. I promise I will be here to catch you. Faith rested her head against his chest, hearing the steady beat of his heart, and felt some of the fear begin to ease. They stood there for a long time, holding each other beside the quiet pond while the cold wind whispered through the willows. The weeks leading up to Christmas were the happiest of Faith's life. Zachary courted her with a determination and creativity that left her breathless. He brought her wildflowers he found on the range, their stems wrapped carefully to keep them fresh. He read to her in the evenings from books of poetry and adventure stories. He taught her to ride better, patiently correcting her form until she could gallop across the prairie with confidence. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, sharing their histories, their dreams, their fears. Faith told him about her childhood on the farm, about her parents and her brothers, about the day the horse had kicked her and changed her life forever. Zachary listened without judgment, holding her hand while she spoke of the pain and the isolation that had followed. In turn, he shared his own losses, the grief of losing both parents within a few years of each other, the weight of responsibility that came with running the ranch alone, the loneliness of living without a partner to share the burdens and the joys. "I have been alone for a long time," he said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "Even when I was surrounded by people, I felt alone, until you came. You have given me something I did not even know I was missing." "What is that?" Faith asked, her hand clasped in his. "Hope. The sense that the future could be better than the past. The feeling that I am not just maintaining this ranch but building towards something." Faith turned to him, seeing the sincerity in his eyes, and made a decision. "Zachary, I love you. I think I have loved you for a while now, but I was too afraid to admit it. But I do not want to be afraid anymore. I want to build towards something with you." The joy on his face was worth every moment of fear it had taken to say the words. He kissed her then, deep and passionate, and Faith felt the last of her defenses crumble away. She was vulnerable now, her heart fully exposed, but she trusted this man with it. He had earned that trust through countless small kindnesses and unwavering patience. On Christmas morning, Zachary asked her to marry him properly, getting down on one knee in the parlor in front of the Christmas tree they had decorated together. He offered her a simple gold band that had been his grandmother's, and Faith said yes without hesitation, her heart so full of happiness she thought it might burst. They were married in early January of 1898, in a simple ceremony at the small church in Enid. Pete served as Zachary's best man, and Martha Henderson stood up with Faith, having become a friend during Faith's occasional trips to town. The hands attended, scrubbed clean and wearing their best clothes, and several neighboring families came to witness the vows. Faith wore a dress of deep blue wool that Martha had helped her sew, and she did not cover her scar with a veil. She walked down the aisle with her head held high, meeting Zachary's eyes across the small church, and saw nothing but love and pride in his gaze. When the minister asked if anyone objected, Alois Crawford, who had come out of apparent duty to the community, opened her mouth as if to speak. But Pete turned around in his seat and gave her such a quelling look that she closed it again with an audible snap, and Faith had to suppress a smile. The vows were traditional, but when Zachary spoke them, promising to love, honor, and cherish her through all the days of their lives, Faith heard the truth of them in his voice. And when it was her turn, she spoke her promises with a clarity and strength she had not known she possessed, claiming this man and this life with full awareness of how precious they were. The kiss that sealed their marriage was chaste, appropriate for the public setting, but the look in Zachary's eyes promised much more for later. They walked back down the aisle hand in hand, husband and wife, and Faith felt as if she were floating. The wedding breakfast was held at the ranch, with Faith having prepared as much food as possible in advance, and the neighboring women bringing the rest. It was a joyous celebration, with fiddle music and dancing, laughter and toasts. Faith accepted congratulations with grace, no longer flinching when people looked at her face, secure in the knowledge that she was loved and valued. "You look happy," Martha told her as they stood watching the dancing. "Truly happy." "I am," Faith said simply. "I never thought I could be this happy, but I am. Zachary is a good man. You are fortunate, both of you." As evening fell and the guests departed, Zachary and Faith were finally alone. He carried her over the threshold of the house they would now share as equals and set her down gently in the front hall. "Hello, wife," he said, smiling down at her. "Hello, husband." Faith reached up to touch his face, marveling that she had the right to do so now, that this man belonged to her as surely as she belonged to him. They climbed the stairs together, Zachary having moved Faith's belongings into the master bedroom that had been his parents' and then his alone. It was a large room with a fireplace, a massive bed, and windows that looked out over the prairie. He had filled it with flowers, their scent perfuming the air, and had laid a fire that crackled cheerfully. "Are you nervous?" Zachary asked, turning to face her. Faith considered the question honestly. "A little, but more excited than nervous. We will take this at your pace. There is no hurry." He reached for the buttons on her dress, his fingers gentle. "I just want to be with you, to hold you, to show you how much I love you." What followed was tender and sweet, Zachary taking his time to learn every inch of her, kissing the scar on her face with the same reverence he showed the rest of her body. He made her feel beautiful in a way she had never felt before, desirable and cherished and wholly loved. And when they finally came together as husband and wife, it felt like a completion, two halves finding their whole. Afterward, they lay tangled together, Faith's head on Zachary's chest, his hand stroking her hair. The fire crackled, casting dancing shadows on the walls, and outside the window the winter stars burned cold and bright. "I never thought I would have this," Faith said softly. "A husband who loved me, a real marriage, a home of my own. I had accepted that my life would be spent alone." "You are not alone anymore." Zachary pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "You will never be alone again. We are in this together now, for better or worse, as long as we both shall live." Faith closed her eyes, letting herself sink into the comfort of his embrace, and felt a peace she had never known. She had been so certain that the scar defined her, that it was all anyone would ever see when they looked at her. But Zachary had shown her a different truth, that beauty was not about perfection, but about authenticity, that she could be fully herself, scar and all, and be loved for it. The winter passed in a blur of happiness. Faith continued to cook for the household, but now as the mistress of the ranch rather than merely the hired help. The distinction seemed subtle, but it changed everything. She had authority now, the right to make decisions about the household, to direct expenditures, to plan for the future. She and Zachary worked together on ranch business, Faith proving to have a good head for numbers and organization. She took over the account books, catching several errors that had gone unnoticed, and instituted a new system for tracking expenses that made things much more efficient. Zachary valued her input, discussing decisions with her, respecting her opinions even when they disagreed. Their nights were spent in each other's arms, learning the rhythms of each other's bodies, finding joy in the physical expression of their love. And during the days, they built a partnership, a true marriage of equals that honored the model Zachary's parents had set. Spring came, bringing with it the hard work of calving season. Faith often did not see Zachary for days at a time, as he spent nights on the range helping with difficult births and protecting the newborn calves from predators. She kept coffee and hot meals ready at all hours, and when he finally stumbled in exhausted, She helped him strip off his cold, wet clothes and got him into bed where he could rest. It was during one of these exhausting stretches in late April that Faith realized she had missed her monthly courses. At first, she attributed it to stress and the change in seasons, but as the weeks passed and she began to feel queasy in the mornings, she allowed herself to hope. Martha Henderson confirmed her suspicions when Faith drove into town in early May. "You are definitely with child," the older woman said with a smile. "Congratulations, my dear. How does Zachary feel about becoming a father?" "I have not told him yet," Faith admitted. "I wanted to be certain first, but I will tell him tonight." She waited until after supper when they were alone on the porch watching the stars emerge. "Zachary, I have something to tell you." He turned to her, hearing the note of nervousness in her voice. "What is it? Is something wrong?" "No, nothing is wrong. In fact, everything is very right." She took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby. In late December or early January, if Martha's calculations are correct." The expression on Zachary's face went through several transformations: surprise, joy, wonder, and finally a fierce pride that made Faith's heart swell. "A baby, we are going to have a baby." "Yes." Faith found herself laughing at his stunned tone. "Are you pleased?" "Pleased." He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "Faith, I am beyond pleased. I am overjoyed, thrilled, happier than I have ever been." He pulled back to look at her face. "How do you feel? Are you well? What do you need?" "I am fine, just a bit sick in the mornings." "Martha says that is normal and should pass in a few weeks." Faith cupped his face in her hands. "We are going to be parents, Zachary. We are going to have a family." "A family." He said the word as if testing it and then smiled, bright and wide and full of wonder. "Our family." The pregnancy progressed normally, and as summer turned to fall, Faith's belly grew round with new life. Zachary was attentive to the point of being overprotective, trying to prevent her from doing anything he deemed too strenuous. Faith had to firmly remind him that women had been having babies and continuing to work for millennia, and that she was not an invalid. They compromised, Faith continuing to cook, but allowing Zachary to hire a young woman from town to help with the heavy cleaning and laundry. Her name was Clara, and she was cheerful and hardworking, thrilled to have the position. With her help, Faith was able to rest more, which she admitted was welcome as the pregnancy progressed, and fatigue became a constant companion. In late December, as snow began to fall across the prairie, Faith's labor began. Martha came to help, along with a doctor from Enid, and Zachary paced the downstairs while Faith labored in the bedroom above. It was long and difficult, and there were moments when Zachary, hearing her cries, wanted to break down the door and demand they do something to help her. But Martha and the doctor knew their business, and finally, as dawn broke on a frigid morning, a baby's cry pierced the air. Zachary took the stairs 3 at a time and burst into the bedroom to find Faith propped up against the pillows, exhausted but beaming, a small bundle in her arms. Martha was cleaning up and the doctor was washing his hands, both of them smiling. "Come meet your son," Faith said, her voice tired but full of joy. "A son." Zachary crossed to the bed on trembling legs and looked down at the tiny face peering out from the blankets. He had a cap of dark hair, eyes that would probably be blue like his father's, and impossibly small hands that curled and uncurled. "He is perfect," Zachary breathed, reaching out to touch one tiny fist with his finger. The baby's hand closed around it, and Zachary felt his heart turn over completely. "Absolutely perfect. Would you like to hold him?" Faith offered the bundle up, and Zachary took his son in careful arms, hardly daring to breathe for fear of damaging something so small and precious. The baby gazed up at him with unfocused eyes, and Zachary felt tears prick his own. "Hello, little one. I am your father, and I promise to love you and protect you and teach you everything I know. You are the luckiest boy in the world because you have the most amazing mother." Faith watched her husband with their son and felt such a surge of love that it almost hurt. This was her family, these two people who held her heart. She had come to Oklahoma Territory alone and scarred, believing she would never be loved, never have this. And yet here it was, more than she had ever dared dream. They named him Michael after Zachary's father, and he proved to be a healthy, happy baby who filled the house with his cries and later, his laughter. Zachary was a devoted father, taking his turn with night feedings, walking the floor when Michael was fussy, and generally besotted with his son in a way that made Faith fall in love with him all over again. 2 years later, they welcomed a daughter, Sarah, named after Zachary's mother. She had her mother's dark hair and determination, and from the moment she could crawl, she followed her big brother everywhere. 2 years after that came another son, Thomas, a placid baby who rarely cried and seemed content to observe the world with solemn eyes. The ranch prospered under their joint management. Zachary expanded the herd, bought additional land from a retiring neighbor, and implemented new breeding strategies that improved the quality of their cattle. Faith managed the household with efficiency, raised the children with love and firmness, and still found time to keep the account books and help with ranch decisions. The hands came and went over the years, but Pete remained, growing older but no less capable, appointing himself honorary grandfather to the children and teaching them to ride almost before they could walk. Tommy Brennan married Clara and built a house on the ranch property, staying on as foreman when Pete finally retired. Neighbors became friends, and the Jennings Ranch became known for its hospitality and the quality of Faith's cooking. She still cooked for the large crews during branding and roundup, and her meals were legendary, drawing compliments from cowboys who had eaten in every ranch kitchen from Texas to Montana. Faith's scar faded somewhat over the years, becoming a thin white line that was barely noticeable to anyone who did not know to look for it. But even when it had been fresh and angry, Zachary had never flinched from it. He kissed it as casually as he kissed any other part of her face, and their children, growing up with it as a normal part of their mother's appearance, never questioned or commented on it. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Zachary took Faith back to the pond where he had told her he wanted to marry her. It was summer, the willows lush and green, the water sparkling in the sunlight. They spread a blanket on the bank and lay in the shade, holding hands and watching the clouds drift by. "You remember the first time I brought you here?" Zachary asked. "Of course. I thought you were mad, saying you wanted to marry me when we had known each other only 3 months. I knew what I wanted." He rolled onto his side, propping his head on his hand to look down at her. "I knew you were the one the day you arrived and jumped right into cooking supper without a moment's hesitation. Everything since has only confirmed it." Faith reached up to touch his face, this beloved face that had become as familiar to her as her own. "I thought I would spend my life alone. I was certain no one would ever see past my scar to who I was underneath. And then you did, from the very first moment. You changed everything for me, Zachary. You changed everything for me, too. You gave me a family, a real home, a reason to build instead of just maintain. You made me happy in ways I did not even know were possible." He leaned down to kiss her, slow and sweet. "I love you, Faith Jennings. More today than yesterday, less than tomorrow." "I love you too." Faith pulled him closer, losing herself in the kiss, in the warmth of the summer day, in the profound gratitude she felt for this life they had built together. They had 5 children in total: Michael, Sarah, Thomas, and later twin daughters named Hope and Grace. The house rang with laughter and noise, with the chaos and joy of a large family. Faith taught her daughters to cook and sew, and Zachary taught all his children to ride and rope and understand the land that would be their heritage. As the children grew, Faith sometimes looked at her oldest son and saw the boy who had once courted her before the accident, the one who had turned away in horror at her damaged face. Michael looked nothing like him, but he had that same age, that same youth and promise. And she would think about how different her life would have been if that boy had been a man of character, if he had stayed and loved her despite the scar. But then she would look at Zachary, still handsome in his middle years, his hair touched with gray at the temples, his face lined with sun and smile crinkles around his eyes, and she would feel nothing but gratitude that the boy had left. Because if he had stayed, she would never have come to Oklahoma territory. She would never have met Zachary. She would never have had this life, this love, this family. Everything that had seemed like tragedy had led her here, to this place of profound happiness and belonging. The scar that had once defined her, that had made her believe she was unworthy of love, had become simply a part of her story, no more important than any other experience that had shaped her into the woman she was. On her 40th birthday, surrounded by her husband and children, by friends and neighbors who had become like family, Faith looked around the crowded dining room table and felt a contentment so deep it brought tears to her eyes. "Why are you crying, Mama?" Grace asked, concerned. "These are happy tears, sweetheart." Faith reached for Zachary's hand and squeezed it. "I am just grateful for all of you, for this beautiful life we have built." Zachary raised his glass. "To Faith, the heart of this home and the love of my life. Everything good in my world stems from you." "To Mama," the children chorused, raising their own glasses of milk or water. After the meal, after the children had been put to bed and the kitchen cleaned, Faith and Zachary sat on the porch as they had done countless times before, watching the stars emerge in the vast Oklahoma sky. "Do you ever regret it?" Faith asked. "Marrying someone like me instead of someone more conventional?" Zachary turned to her, his expression incredulous. "Are you serious?" "Faith, marrying you is the best decision I ever made. You are the most extraordinary person I know. You have given me everything I ever wanted and things I did not know I needed. Why would I regret a single moment? I just wonder sometimes if you might have been happier with someone else, someone who did not come with complications. You listened to me." Zachary took both her hands in his grip firm and warm. "I have never, not for one single second, wished you were different. I fell in love with you exactly as you are, scar and strength and stubborn pride and all. You are not damaged, Faith. You never were. You are beautiful and brave and capable of so much love. Any man would be lucky to have you, and I thank God every day that I am the one who does." Faith felt the last small shadow of doubt, the one that had lingered despite years of love and proof, finally dissolve. She looked at this man who had seen her truly from the beginning, who had never wavered in his devotion, who had given her a life beyond anything she had imagined possible, and knew with absolute certainty that she was loved. "Thank you," she said simply, "for seeing me, for loving me, for giving me this life. Thank you for saying yes." Zachary pulled her close, and they sat together as night fell over the prairie, two people who had found each other against the odds and built something beautiful from nothing but love and determination. Years continued to pass, marked by the turning of the seasons, by the growth of children into adults with families of their own. Michael took over more of the ranch operations, learning from his father, developing his own ideas while respecting the foundation that had been laid. Sarah married a neighboring rancher's son and moved to her own land nearby. Thomas showed an aptitude for business and eventually went to work buying and selling cattle, traveling between Oklahoma and Kansas and Missouri, but always coming home to the Double J. Hope and Grace, the twins, proved to be as different as their names suggested. Hope was optimistic and outgoing, quick to laugh and slow to judge. Grace was quieter, more thoughtful, with a talent for drawing that eventually led her to pursue art in a serious way. But both loved the ranch fiercely, and neither strayed far. Grandchildren came, filling the house once again with young voices and laughter. Faith taught them to cook as she had taught their parents, passing on recipes and techniques, but more than that, passing on the values of hard work, excellence, and taking pride in a job well done. Zachary taught them about the land, about respecting animals and nature, about the satisfaction that came from building something that would outlast you. On their 30th anniversary, the family threw them a party that drew people from 3 counties. The house and yard overflowed with guests, and a band played for dancing. Faith, now in her 50s, her hair touched with silver, moved through the crowd accepting congratulations and thinking about how impossible this all would have seemed to the frightened young woman who had arrived in Enid 30 years ago. Zachary found her standing alone for a moment on the edge of the festivities, looking out at the prairie that stretched to the horizon. "What are you thinking?" he asked, slipping his arm around her waist. "I am thinking that I am the luckiest woman alive." Faith leaned into his embrace. "That I was given a second chance at life when I thought all chances were gone. That I have been loved by you for 30 years and it still feels like a miracle. I am the lucky one." Zachary turned her to face him. "You took a chance on a rancher who had the audacity to fall in love with his cook. You gave me a family, a home, a reason to wake up smiling every day. You made me a better man than I was before I met you." "We made each other better," Faith said. "That is what love does, I think. It does not complete you because you were already complete. But it expands you, makes you more than you were, creates space for growth and joy you did not know were possible." They danced together as the sun set, surrounded by children and grandchildren and friends, and Faith thought about beauty. Real beauty, the kind that lasted. It was not in a smooth face or perfect features. It was in a life well lived, in love given and received, in the small daily acts of kindness and courage that built something lasting. She had believed herself ugly, unworthy of love, but Zachary had shown her a different truth. He had seen beauty in everything she did, in the way her hands moved as she worked, in the steadiness of her spirit, in the courage it took to keep going when things were hard. And in seeing herself through his eyes, she had learned to see her own worth. The scar was still there, would always be there, but it had become simply a part of her face, no more or less important than her eyes or her nose. It was a reminder of a difficult time, but also a reminder of everything that had come after, all the joy and love and life that had bloomed from that place of pain. As night fell and the party continued, Faith and Zachary slipped away to sit on their porch, needing a moment of quiet together. They rocked in companionable silence, hands clasped, watching the familiar dance of the stars overhead. "You remember the night we met?" Faith asked. "You said beauty was in the way a person moves through the world. I did not believe you then. And now I understand what you meant. Beauty is not something you have or do not have. It is something you create through how you live, how you love, how you treat others. You taught me that, Zachary. You taught me to see myself as worthy and valuable, and that changed everything. You were always worthy, Faith. I just helped you see what was already there." He raised her hand to his lips and kissed it. "You are the most beautiful woman I have ever known, and that has nothing to do with your face and everything to do with your heart." They sat together until the party wound down and the guests departed. until their children and grandchildren said their goodnights and headed to their own homes or to the guest rooms upstairs. And then they climbed the stairs to the bedroom they had shared for 3 decades, helping each other undress with the easy intimacy of long marriage. In bed, wrapped in each other's arms, Faith thought about the journey that had brought her here. From a frightened, scarred young woman who believed herself unlovable to a confident matriarch of a large, loving family. From isolation to belonging. From shame to pride. From despair to joy. None of it would have been possible without Zachary's love, but also without her own courage in accepting that love, in believing him when he said she was beautiful, in taking the risk to open her heart despite all her fears. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Zachary replied, his arms tightening around her. "Always have, always will." And Faith, secure in the knowledge that she was loved and valued, that her life had meaning and purpose, that she had built something beautiful and lasting, drifted off to sleep with a smile on her face, ready for whatever tomorrow might bring, knowing she would face it with her beloved partner by her side. The years continued to unfold, each one bringing its own mixture of joy and sorrow, triumph and challenge. Pete passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 89, and the entire community came to his funeral to honor a man who had lived his life with integrity and kindness. Zachary delivered the eulogy, his voice breaking only once as he spoke of the man who had been mentor, friend, and surrogate grandfather to his children. Faith's health remained good well into her 60s, though she finally conceded to letting the younger generation do most of the cooking for large gatherings. She supervised from a chair in the kitchen, offering advice and criticism in equal measure, but secretly pleased to see her skills passed on to children and grandchildren who would carry them forward. Zachary developed arthritis in his hands from years of ranch work, but refused to slow down, insisting he would work the ranch until the day he died, or his body absolutely refused to cooperate, whichever came first. Michael took on more responsibility, but father and son worked side by side, a partnership built on mutual respect and deep affection. On their 40th anniversary, they repeated their vows in the same church where they had first married, surrounded by a crowd so large it overflowed the building. 4 decades of love, of partnership, of building a life together, and Faith looked at Zachary across the altar and felt the same flutter in her heart she had felt the first time. His hair was white now, his face deeply lined, his hands gnarled and scarred from decades of hard work. But his eyes were still the same brilliant blue, and when they looked at her, she still saw the love and admiration that had been there from the beginning. "I would marry you again every single day," Zachary said when it was his turn to speak. "You are my heart, my home, my reason for everything. Thank you for 40 years of happiness." Faith spoke her vows through tears, promising once again to love, honor, and cherish this man who had given her the world. And when they kissed, the church erupted in applause and cheers, celebrating not just a marriage but a love story that had inspired everyone who witnessed it. The celebration afterward lasted into the night, with food and music and dancing. Faith watched her grandchildren play, their faces bright with joy and innocence, and felt a profound sense of accomplishment. This was her legacy, not just these children but the love she and Zachary had built, the example they had set, the proof that real love existed and could endure. As the party wound down and guests began to leave, Michael stood and called for attention. "I would like to say something about my parents," he said, his voice carrying in the sudden quiet. "Growing up, I watched the way my father looked at my mother, like she was the most precious thing in his world. And I watched the way my mother looked at my father with the same love and devotion. They taught us that marriage is work, yes, but also joy. That love is a choice you make every single day. That respect and partnership matter more than passion, though they certainly had that too. The crowd laughed, and Michael smiled. They built this ranch from good to great together. They raised 5 children who adore them. They have been a rock for this community, always ready to help a neighbor, always willing to lend a hand. And they did it all while clearly crazy about each other, even after 40 years. That is the kind of love I hope to have, that we all hope to have. So thank you, Mom and Dad, for showing us what true love looks like. There were murmurs of agreement, and Sarah stood as well. When I was a little girl, I asked my mother about her scar. She told me it was from an accident, but that it had brought her to Oklahoma and to Dad, so she would not change it even if she could. I did not understand that then, but I do now. Sometimes the things we think are our greatest weaknesses turn out to be the path to our greatest blessings. Mom taught me to be strong, to work hard, to never give up. And Dad taught me that real men see a woman's worth, her intelligence and competence and character. Together, they taught me what love should look like, and I am grateful every day. One by one, the children stood and spoke, sharing memories and lessons, painting a picture of a marriage built on mutual respect, enduring love, and shared purpose. Faith cried openly, overwhelmed by the outpouring of affection, and Zachary held her hand tightly, his own eyes suspiciously bright. When it was finally over and they were alone, they sat together on the porch as they had done thousands of times before. The prairie stretched out before them, silver in the moonlight, vast and beautiful and home. "We did all right, did we not?" Zachary said softly. "We did more than all right. We built something extraordinary." Faith rested her head on his shoulder. "Thank you for loving me, Zachary, for seeing past the scar to the woman underneath, for giving me a life I never dreamed possible. Thank you for taking a chance on a rancher who fell in love with you at first sight." Zachary kissed the top of her head. "Thank you for being brave enough to believe me when I said you were beautiful. Thank you for saying yes." They sat in comfortable silence, 2 people who had traveled through life together, weathering storms and celebrating triumphs, growing old together with grace and gratitude. The scar on Faith's face had faded to near invisibility, a ghost of the mark that had once defined her. But even if it had remained vivid, it would not have mattered. Zachary had taught her that beauty was not in perfection but in authenticity, not in appearance but in character. And she had taught him that love was worth the risk, that opening your heart to someone made you stronger rather than weaker, that partnership could transform good into great. Together, they had built a legacy that would outlast them, a ranch that would provide for generations, children and grandchildren who understood the value of hard work and genuine love, and a story that would be told for years to come about the rancher who saw beauty where others saw only a flaw, and the woman who learned to see herself through the eyes of love. As the stars wheeled overhead and the coyotes called in the distance, Faith thought about the scared young woman who had stepped off the wagon 30 years ago, certain she would spend her life alone and unloved. If she could speak to that woman now, she would tell her to be brave, to take the chance, to believe that miracles were possible. Because she had lived one, every single day, in the love of a good man who saw her truly and loved what he saw. And that, Faith knew, was the greatest gift of all, to be seen, to be loved, to be valued for exactly who you were. No masks, no pretense, just 2 people choosing each other over and over again, building a life from nothing but love and determination and faith in each other. The prairie wind whispered through the grass, carrying with it the scent of sage and dust and growing things. Faith breathed it in, this air that tasted of home, and smiled. She had found her place in the world, and it was here, beside the man who had always seen her beauty, who had taught her to see it herself, who had given her a love that would last beyond their lifetimes. And that was everything.